All right, so today I just wanted to go over a personal project that I've been working on. Um, this has been something I've thought about for many years, and I have started and restarted many times. So I thought I'd just make a video to go through the code, though, because I think the code is interesting, and even if the concept itself may not ever be successful, I feel like it's useful to show off the kinds of things I'm doing in my spare time. Um, so the project, which I don't have a README yet, probably should work on that. But the project is a game. Let's see, how would I describe it? Indent Horizon is a game where players code spaceships to explore the galaxy. And I think it's in a similar vein to a lot of stuff like Screeps would be a big name. Screeps is a very similar concept where it's a MMO RTS in which players build build scripts to run on a virtual machine on the server to build a little automated empire. So Indent Horizon is similar, except the focus is not so RTS like and more like an RPG. Like you're focusing on one ship, and that ship is going to be exploring, and it's like your character, like on EVE Online maybe. And you're going to automate it to explore while you're away from the computer, to mine resources, to discover new hyperlanes and new planets. And then you check up on it however often you want to see what it's collected or what it's found and what trades it's made with NPCs or other players in the world. So to start out with this project, I started with building the server, and it's in JavaScript, so Node.js. And right now, the meat of it is in this file. You can run it by just doing nodemon index.js. I will go ahead and, or npm runs dev. I can go ahead and do this. However, yeah, I'll go ahead and run through the couple tests I made, which I need to use a proper testing library too, but that's another project for another time at the moment. Before this project is done, obviously, I'll have to do more robust testing than just running some files. But if I go ahead and run the connect, just show you real quick what it does before I go over all of the code in the server side. Open an integrated terminal. And let's go ahead and split the screen. Oh, I can do this. Let's see. So if I go ahead and run connect.js, it connects to localhost successfully. It doesn't close because I forgot to write that into that test, but if I run send code, it'll send some test code over. As you can see, the test code just says hello, and it gets ran once per cycle, which in my game is at the moment 500 milliseconds, or however long it takes to go through all of the scripts that are running on the server, which all time out around 100 milliseconds, at exactly 100 milliseconds, which I'll show you in the code here in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and Control-C that and close that. Since the game doesn't have a client side yet, it's not super easy to show what gameplay would look like. It's a very unfinished product. But I can go through the code. So I'm using the net package, And I'm using isolated VM. The net package will be for socket communicating, so that we can communicate between the client and the server. Send code runs on the server. Oh, you can't see my hands. Send code runs on the server. And then isolated VM is what actually Screeps, the game I mentioned, uses to isolate user-created code and run it in a safer environment than just running it directly in your program. So I figured I wanted to use whatever other people are using for similar tasks to keep it safe, so that no one writes like some kind of hostile script that takes over the game server itself. Then on line 3, we can see I'm importing some game functions. These game functions are just going to be the functions that players or devs can use to create entities that run in the game server. I went ahead and created a skeleton auth file, which is not finished right now. It's mostly just empty at the moment. And I created a DB, which eventually this will probably be in MongoDB. And that'll be like a couple hours, maybe an hour or something. It probably won't take me that long to implement that. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So right now, if I look in the DB file, it just has a collection object with some random test data in there, and exports that as a function. So max runtime in milliseconds, that's how long a script can run. Then we have all of our sandboxes, which is what I'm going to call a single VM instance with a single context running player code. So here's a function constructor to create a sandbox. We take an ID, which would be like the entity ID to look up in the database. So every player's ship that they code will have an ID. Every object in the game is going to have an ID if it is like an important object that is not just hard coded into the game. So like the idea is that players create ships, and then devs, I will be in a very similar way creating asteroids, planets, NPCs, space stations, and what have you. And we'll go over how that works with like privileges here in a minute. But for the sandbox, you create an isolate with isolated VM. You give it a memory limit, which I haven't really decided what the memory limit should be yet. Right now I just have it at 1024 for testing. You pass it the code, you pass the entity ID, you pass the owner, which I think is going to end up being the handle for a player account. And then there's the run function, which goes ahead and runs that code on an isolated VM. And it runs it once per cycle, which, as I mentioned a minute ago, a cycle would be like one cycle runs every single script that is relevant to this server. So if this server encapsulates maybe like one solar system, then any game entity that requires a script in that solar system will have a script, have a sandbox, and later on in my code, you'll see it calls this function to run once every 500 milliseconds, or if it takes longer, once per cycle, and a cycle is just going through all the scripts. So a little over-explaining myself there, but I have a to-do here. Consider whether it matters if scripts are ran at the same time. I can't decide whether I want things to be just synchronous or asynchronous. I feel like it could get messy if things are asynchronous and like editing the database that way. Obviously there's going to be like MongoDB has locks and everything, so I don't have to worry too much about something breaking, more just like gameplay breaking. Like, do we need things to happen in a certain order? And I'm not really sure yet because I'm still designing the game. Dispose gets rid of the sandbox, or rather, it gets rid of the VM, and then it does not delete the sandbox from sandboxes, but it does get rid of the VM. So yeah, so here's where the server is created. We use the net package to create a server. And right now I have it set up so it'll just read JSON from a client and pull out some key value pairs. And there's only really one command that's relevant at the moment. There will probably be more later, or I might create a whole nother like web app for things like creating users, or whatever like monetization I decide to put in the game, if any. Probably won't happen in this code. This repo is for just running a single server. So I may add more functionality here, like perhaps it can take functions to look up nearby shards or something like that. So a little bit of error checking here, make sure there's a code and an entity. If not, tell the client that something's wrong. I haven't implemented the authentication, so right now there's to-do sitting there. But let's see, we're on socket. Yeah. So whenever you receive code, and the moment on data just receives code, so you'll want to delete an old isolate under that entity ID. This ensures that this whole structure here ensures that per an entity, so per like an asteroid, per planet, per ship, there is only one script running at a time. So then anytime we upload new code, we want to shut down the old VM running that code and then start a new one right here with that function constructor. And of course close the socket because we don't need to do anything else after that. It's all going to be running on the server. Got a little socket.in, let the client, just console log that the client's disconnected. An error to print out any errors with a timestamp attached to it. Okay, so here's server.listen. Here's calculate cycle rate, which I've talked about a lot already. So max time would go through and it'd look at how many total sandboxes are running and multiply that by the max runtime, which is also, if you noticed earlier, whenever we run code, we pass it a timeout, which is max runtime. So any code that you send the server will never go more than this time right here in milliseconds, which I've set to 100 at the moment. So yeah, going back to this, calculate cycle rate, it will either, max time is either going to be greater than 500, which case we return that, or we return 500. So the minimum amount of time per cycle will be 500. So if a script runs and it takes like 1 millisecond, then we'll spend 499 milliseconds just chilling. And then here's the set interval that's doing just that. It goes through each sandbox and it runs it and catches errors. And if it does catch an error, it goes ahead and disposes of the particular sandbox causing that error. So that's kind of the meat of the code, the meat of the server. It's a weird thing to say, meat of the server. Here's the game functions, which I'm still working on. Anything that starts with dev, I guess I can go over a little bit of the auth. So to do both these at once here. Go ahead. So game functions, there's the dev game functions, which are like, I probably should rename it. It's not like they're only accessible during development. It's more like it's for the developers. So if I want to make a script that describes the functionality of like how a planet behaves. So a planet probably, I don't know, maybe it restores its own resources. There's some renewable resources on a planet that ships can harvest, right? Well, we don't want to give that functionality to players. If a player ends up owning a planet, we don't want them to be able to just set infinite resources on the planet. That would not be cool. So those are set as dev functions, which I haven't thought about what that would look like if players could own planets, and maybe there's like scripts for planets that I feel like if it's something that is dev created, probably the player never gets a script for it. So like maybe in gameplay you can own it, but that doesn't mean that you can like upload a script. I don't know, I'll have to work that out later. But we've got set orbit, set owner, add satellite, and we've got the non-dev stuff. Get data about the entity. So maybe you need to know all of the stats of your ship. This is actually an important function because the first client that I will write is going to be completely command line interface, and we'll just show text. So get entity data. Well, you'll need that for like a graphical one too, but get entity data will get the data about a ship. Sorry, that didn't make any sense what I just said. Get entity data might be important so that when you're running a script, you can actually know what's happening inside the script. Yeah, this is actually kind of irrelevant to the client because the scripts are running on the server. I don't know where I was going with that. And then things like entering hyperspace via a hyperspace lane, offering a trade out, listing trades, accepting trades. There's going to be a lot of different functions. Like I'm going to try to keep it small because I don't want players to spend a long time learning how to play. I want it to be about coding, but not about reading copious documentation. I want it to be pretty simple. So probably I'll write a bunch of functions and then start getting rid of ones that I think are just like, or combining ones that I think, no one's really going to want to use something that specific. And then over here, this is just the code to determine whether something is a dev function and restrict it accordingly. So because of the way I've set this up, where it actually is written into the name of the function, basically we go through all of the functions, allowed functions. So all the functions available to players in a VM, and we say, hey, is this a dev that owns this entity? If it's not a dev, you can add. So if the owner is not a dev and the function is not a dev function, add it. But otherwise, wow, my logic for this was confusing. If the owner is a dev, and if it's a dev function, add it to the allowed functions. If the owner's not a dev, else if the owner's not a dev, you can add it. I probably need another check there, don't I? Yeah. Oh, that's what it's happening. This is why you should comment. If the owner is dev, then always add the function. Devs have access to all functions. If the owner is not a dev, then only add the function if the function is a non-dev function. It's a little wordy, but cool. And this will probably have to hit up some kind of authorization server, which probably will be HTTP instead of net, because that makes more sense to me. Can I like make a HTTP server that's like deployed on Vercel edge functions or something. I think that'll be pretty flexible. Yeah, so that's pretty much all the code I have so far. If you look at my tests, this is kind of what it looks like. I'm going to create a front-end library, front-end module that makes all of this a lot easier, but at the moment, we, do some socket programming and then hit the server up with some JSON. So, all right. Thanks for watching my video. And I'll let you know when there's more.